a lonely rancher found a starving Apache woman, and unknowingly his future wife. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and at night the wind whistled through the wooden fences and the dry grass. John had grown used to the quiet, the only sounds being the lowing of his cattle, the creak of the windmill, and the occasional howl of a coyote. He had lived this way for many years, ever since his parents had passed and he inherited the ranch. Life was simple, but it was lonely. Every morning John woke before dawn. He fed the horses, milked the cows, and checked the fences. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but he took pride in every task. The land gave him a sense of freedom, and the animals became his companions. Yet at the end of the day, when the chores were done and the sun dipped below the horizon, a deep sense of loneliness crept over him. The nights were long, and the silence sometimes felt heavier than the weight of the sun during the day. One particular afternoon, the sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and gold. John had spent the day repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. Sweat dripped from his brow as he hammered the last post into place. Tired but satisfied, he took a moment to look over his land. That's when he noticed something unusual. Far off, along the dusty trail that led to the nearby hills, a faint figure was moving. At first he thought it might be a traveler or a ranch hand from a neighboring farm, but something about the movement seemed weak, almost staggering. John squinted against the setting sun, trying to see clearly. The figure was small and thin, and it appeared to be struggling to walk. Her steps were uneven, and she seemed to lean heavily on an invisible support. Concern gnawed at John. He had seen travelers pass by before, but rarely anyone in such obvious distress. He wiped his hands on his shirt, grabbed his hat, and began walking toward her. The closer he got, the more he could see that she was in a bad state. When he finally reached her, John saw that she was a young woman, barely more than a teenager. Her clothes were torn and her feet were bare, dusty, and bruised. Her hair was tangled, and her face, though beautiful, was pale and gaunt from hunger and exhaustion. She looked up at him with wide, wary eyes, a mixture of fear and relief. John instinctively took a step back, not wanting to startle her, but his voice was calm when he spoke. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. The woman said nothing at first. She just stared as if trying to understand whether he was a friend or a threat. John noticed the shivering of her shoulders, not from cold, though the evening air was cool, but from weakness. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread he always carried for his lunch. He extended it slowly, hoping she would take it. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from the bread to his face. Hunger must have won over caution because she finally took it, holding it with both hands as if it were a treasure. John watched carefully, making sure she wasn't afraid. He wanted her to feel safe. "Can you walk?" he asked after a moment. The young woman nodded slightly but did not speak. John offered his arm to help her, but she shook her head. Instead, he gently guided her toward his ranch, giving her space while making sure she didn't fall. The walk was slow. She stumbled often, and John supported her when needed. Every few steps she would pause, crouch down, and rest, still gripping the bread. By the time they reached the small wooden house on his ranch, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only a deep purple sky. John opened the door and motioned for her to come inside. The warmth of the house seemed to surprise her. She hesitated at first, glancing around, but eventually stepped in, still cautious. John led her to a chair and offered her a glass of water. She drank slowly, trembling. John could see that she was extremely weak. Her skin was pale and her eyes had a distant look, as if she had seen too much suffering already. He thought about what might have happened to her. How had she ended up alone in the desert, so far from anyone who could help her? He decided that first, he would make sure she had food and water, then he would find out more about her story gently when she was ready. Over the next few days, John cared for her quietly. He gave her small meals, soft bread, warm milk, and fresh water. He prepared a small bed for her in the corner of the house, with clean sheets and a blanket. The young woman, though still wary, began to eat more confidently. John noticed that her eyes, once dull with fatigue, began to sparkle faintly as she gained strength. He still did not know her name. She only responded with a few words, simple gestures, and shy smiles. John respected her silence. He did not press her to talk. Instead, he continued his daily routine, letting her watch and learn. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and cooked meals, all while keeping an eye on her. Sometimes he caught her staring at the land outside the window, her expression thoughtful and distant, as if remembering something far away. He felt a quiet sympathy for her. She had endured something difficult, something he could only guess at. One evening, after a long day of tending the cattle, John found her sitting quietly near the fireplace. The flickering light danced across her face, showing shadows of both exhaustion and resilience. He realized that despite her hardships, there was a strength within her that fascinated him. He sat across from her and simply smiled. She looked back, a faint smile forming on her lips. It was a small, fragile connection, but it was enough to make John feel something he had not felt in years: hope. Days turned into a week, and the young woman's health improved steadily. She began to speak a little, offering short sentences when John asked questions. Her voice was soft, almost musical, with a tone of cautious trust. She told him her name was Ahioka, though she shared very little else. John did not push. He only nodded and listened, knowing that trust was built slowly. The ranch, once silent except for the sounds of the wind and animals, now felt alive in a different way. John found himself talking more, explaining what he was doing, asking simple questions, and watching her respond. The loneliness that had defined his life seemed to soften. He realized that caring for Ahioka gave him a sense of purpose, beyond the daily chores and routines. He felt protective of her, and for the first time in years he looked forward to the next day, not just to work, but to see her smile, hear her laugh, and witness her small victories as she regained strength. As the sun set each evening, John would watch Ahioka through the window, sometimes stirring the fire, sometimes tending to small tasks, her presence gradually becoming a comfort he could not ignore. He wondered silently about the future, but he did not rush it. For now, he was simply grateful that she had survived, that she was here, and that he could offer her a safe place on this vast, lonely land. Little did John know, the young woman he had rescued in the desert was not just a fragile traveler in need. There was a story behind those cautious eyes, a resilience that would soon change his life in ways he could never have imagined. And though he did not realize it yet, the bond they were beginning to form was the first step toward a future neither of them could have foreseen. John continued his daily life, working hard on the ranch, while Ahioka slowly regained her strength. Each day brought small moments of connection, shared meals, laughter at little mistakes, and quiet conversations by the fire. The loneliness that had been his constant companion began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope and curiosity. He still did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe, just maybe, life had something extraordinary in store. And so, the story of the lonely rancher and the starving young woman began. Not with words or promises, but with a shared struggle, trust slowly being built, and a quiet understanding that their lives had crossed for a reason neither of them yet understood. Ahioka stayed at John's ranch, slowly regaining her strength with each passing day. She was still cautious, still wary of the world outside the safety of the small house, but she began to trust John more with every meal, every kind word, and every small act of care he offered. Her body, once weak from hunger and exhaustion, grew stronger. Her hands, once trembling from fatigue, were now able to help with simple chores. And while she remained quiet most of the time, her eyes began to shine with a light that had been absent when John first found her. John watched her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He wanted to know her story, but he also knew the importance of patience. People who had been through trauma could not be rushed. Ahioka's silence was not stubbornness, it was caution. She had seen the world in a harsh way, and trust was something she had to learn again. John respected that. He went about his daily routines, letting her observe him, giving her space to adjust, and slowly creating an environment of safety and warmth. Every morning, John would wake early and start the chores before the sun fully rose. He fed the horses and cows, checked the fences, and repaired anything broken. Ahioka would often follow him quietly, learning how to handle tools, feed the animals, or gather water. Her hands, now stronger, were nimble and careful. John sometimes offered small instructions, guiding her with patience rather than correction. The bond between them grew quietly, built on shared work and silent understanding. One morning, John decided to take Ahioka to the edge of his property, where a small creek ran through the land. The water was clear and cold, and the sound of it flowing over rocks seemed to bring a sense of peace. Ahioka knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking slowly. John watched her, noticing the way she seemed to absorb every detail around her, the rustle of leaves, the soft calls of birds, the shimmering sunlight reflecting on the water. "You like it here?" John asked gently. Ahioka nodded, but she didn't speak. Her eyes, however, conveyed gratitude, a quiet appreciation that words could not fully express. John smiled softly. He didn't need her to speak to know that she was beginning to feel safe and at ease. It was a small victory, but an important one. In her eyes, he could see a hint of curiosity about the world again, a sign that she was ready to take cautious steps toward healing. Days turned into weeks, and Ahioka began to participate more actively in life on the ranch. She learned to feed the animals, mend fences, and even cook simple meals. Her presence became a comfort to John in ways he had never expected. He found himself talking to her more, explaining what he was doing, asking questions about her preferences, and sharing small stories from his past. She listened attentively, sometimes responding with gestures or a few words, and gradually their communication became richer, though still gentle and patient. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of fence together, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds filled the sky, and a strong wind swept across the plains. John worked quickly to secure the animals, and Ahioka helped by holding gates and guiding the cows to shelter. The wind whipped at their hair and clothes, but they worked as a team, each relying on the other to keep the animals safe. When the storm passed, the ranch was intact, and both of them were soaked and exhausted. They sat together on a large rock, catching their breath, sharing a moment of quiet satisfaction. "Thank you," John said simply, glancing at her. Ahioka looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and relief. She nodded softly, acknowledging his words without needing to speak further. In that simple exchange, a deeper understanding passed between them. They were not just caretaker and rescued, they were partners in the small, shared challenges of daily life. As Ahioka's strength returned, John noticed her curiosity about the land and its animals. She asked questions, simple ones at first, about how to care for a horse or why fences needed repair. John answered patiently, showing her techniques and sharing his knowledge. Slowly, Ahioka began to offer suggestions, sometimes noticing things he had missed or finding clever solutions to small problems. Her intelligence and intuition impressed John. He realized that this young woman, whom he had first seen as fragile and in need, had a quiet strength and wisdom that he had not anticipated. Evenings became a time for quieter interactions. After chores were done, they would sit by the fireplace, sharing food and warmth. Sometimes John would tell stories about his family, about the ranch, and about the people he had met in town. Ahioka listened with rapt attention, occasionally sharing small details from her own life, though always cautiously. She spoke of places she had seen, the mountains her family once roamed, and the traditions she remembered from her childhood. John listened, fascinated, feeling a growing respect for her resilience and courage. Despite the growing closeness between them, there were moments of tension, not from anger but from the challenges of their different worlds. Ahioka had lived among her people, with customs and experiences John could not fully understand. He was careful never to dismiss her knowledge or background, and she gradually learned that he was not like others who might judge or mistreat her. These small moments of mutual respect deepened their trust. One day John noticed that Ahioka was staring at the horizon, her eyes distant and thoughtful. He approached slowly and asked, "What are you thinking about?" She turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "The desert, the land, it is beautiful, but it can be cruel. I have seen much, and I remember it all." John nodded, understanding that her past had shaped her in ways he could not fully know. He offered only his presence, letting her speak if she wished, and she gradually did, sharing fragments of her life, enough to give him insight without causing her pain. Each story, each memory, allowed John to see her as a whole person, strong, brave, and remarkably resilient. The seasons began to shift. Summer gave way to cooler autumn days, and the ranch changed with the turning of the year. The animals grew healthy and strong under their care, and the land seemed to reflect the small but steady happiness growing between them. John found himself looking forward to seeing Ahioka each morning, eager to share the day's work and the simple pleasures of life on the ranch. Ahioka, too, began to look forward to these moments, finding joy in small tasks and in John's gentle company. One evening, as the sun set in shades of red and gold, John and Ahioka sat on the porch, quietly watching the sky. The air was cool and the world seemed peaceful. Ahioka leaned slightly toward John, a subtle gesture that spoke of trust and comfort. He looked at her, realizing how far she had come from the frightened, starving girl he had first found. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a part of his life in a meaningful way. John realized something that night. He cared for her deeply, more than he had expected. Not just as someone he had helped, but as a person he respected, admired, and valued. He did not yet speak these thoughts aloud, knowing that their bond was still fragile and needed time to grow. But inside, he felt a quiet certainty that this young woman, Ahioka, was becoming an indispensable part of his life. And Ahioka, though careful with her words and cautious with her heart, began to feel the same way. She had been alone and afraid for so long, yet here, in this remote ranch with a kind and patient man, she had found safety, companionship, and a place where she could slowly heal. She had not expected to find this, and yet she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The days continued, each one bringing small moments of connection. They worked together, laughed at minor mishaps, and shared quiet evenings by the fire. The bond between them grew steadily, unspoken yet undeniable. John no longer felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him, and Ahioka no longer felt the constant fear of the unknown. Together, they were discovering a new way of living, one built on trust, respect, and the beginnings of friendship that would one day grow into something much deeper. In this way, life on the ranch became a gentle rhythm. The sun rose and set, seasons changed, and the land remained both challenging and beautiful. And within this rhythm, a lonely rancher and a once starving young woman began a journey together, learning from each other, caring for each other, and unknowingly stepping toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between John and Ahioka grew steadily. Their days were filled with work on the ranch, but now there was a quiet companionship that had developed between them. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to an outside observer, but for John and Ahioka, it made the difference between mere survival and truly feeling alive. Ahioka had regained much of her strength. She could now walk the trails without stopping every few steps, and was able to help John with heavier tasks around the ranch. Her hands, once trembling and weak, were now strong and precise, able to mend fences, feed the animals, and even cook meals for them both. John watched her carefully, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with a sense of protectiveness he hadn't felt before. There was something in the way she approached her work, with patience, careful observation, and quiet determination, that drew him to her in ways he could not yet explain. Despite the growing familiarity, there were still moments of hesitation between them. Ahioka had lived in a world very different from John's, a world shaped by the mountains, the desert, and the traditions of her people. She had seen cruelty and betrayal, which made her cautious with strangers. John, for his part, understood this and never pushed her beyond her comfort. He spoke kindly, offered gentle guidance, and let her learn at her own pace. The patience paid off, for over time, Ahioka began to reveal more of herself. One afternoon, John noticed Ahioka sitting quietly on the porch, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. She turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "I think about the mountains, the places I once knew. The wind there feels different. The sky feels closer." John nodded, sensing the depth behind her words. "I can't imagine what it must be like living in those places," he said softly, "but you're safe here now." Ahioka gave a small smile, a gesture of trust more than happiness. It was a subtle sign, but to John, it meant the world. He realized that the young woman who had first appeared fragile and afraid was slowly allowing herself to belong somewhere to someone. And that someone, he discovered, was him. The daily routines of the ranch became shared moments of learning and growth. John taught Ahioka how to handle livestock more efficiently, how to check fences for weakness, and even how to track the weather by observing the clouds and the wind. She learned quickly, her natural intelligence and curiosity shining through. In turn, she showed John small tricks she had learned from her upbringing, ways to calm an anxious horse, gather edible plants, or tend to minor injuries. Their teamwork became seamless, built on mutual respect and quiet observation. One evening, after a long day of work, a small incident occurred that brought them closer in a way neither had expected. A calf had gotten stuck in a ditch, struggling to free itself and frightened by the situation. John rushed to help, but the ground was slippery and he struggled to reach the animal. Ahioka ran to assist without hesitation. Together, they managed to pull the calf out safely. They were both covered in mud and sweat, panting heavily from the effort. John looked at Ahioka, his face breaking into a wide smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, half joking, half sincere. Ahioka's lips curved into a smile, small but genuine. "We make a good team," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of pride. It was a simple moment, but it revealed something deeper. They were no longer just caretaker and rescued. They were partners, each relying on the other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. The trust between them had grown into something stronger, a foundation upon which deeper feelings were quietly building. Over time, Ahioka's presence became a source of joy for John. He found himself looking forward to her laughter, the way she focused on tasks, and the subtle gestures that showed she cared. For Ahioka, John became a source of security and respect, someone who did not judge her for her past and treated her with kindness. In a world that had often been harsh and unkind, this was a rare gift. Despite their growing connection, life on the ranch was not without challenges. The seasons brought their own difficulties. A particularly dry summer threatened the crops and the animals, forcing John and Ahioka to work harder to ensure the ranch survived. During these times, Ahioka's resilience shone. She never complained, only observed, adapted, and acted. She became indispensable, her presence felt in every decision and every task. John noticed this, often marveling at her strength and wisdom, though he kept such thoughts to himself. One evening, after securing the cattle and completing the chores, John and Ahioka sat together on the porch. The sun had just set, casting long shadows across the plains. A gentle wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth, and the quiet sounds of nature surrounded them. "You've changed this place," John said, his voice quiet. "It feels different, better since you arrived." Ahioka looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "It is peaceful," she replied softly, "and I am grateful. I have not known peace for a long time." John felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say more, to tell her how much her presence meant to him, but the words felt too fragile, too early. Instead, he simply nodded and offered a small smile. Ahioka returned it, and for a moment, the unspoken connection between them was enough. The bond continued to grow through small, everyday moments. They shared meals, tended the animals together, and occasionally ventured into the nearby hills to check fences or gather firewood. John taught Ahioka about the land, the animals, and the rhythms of ranch life. She, in turn, showed him small lessons in patience, observation, and quiet resilience. Their interactions were subtle but profound, each learning from the other in ways words could not fully express. As the months passed, their relationship became more nuanced. John began to notice small things, how Ahioka's laughter would linger in his mind, how her thoughtful gestures made daily chores lighter, and how her presence brought a sense of calm he had not known in years. Ahioka, too, noticed the little things about John. The way he approached challenges with determination, the quiet kindness he showed to animals and people alike, and the protective, gentle nature that had saved her life. One day, while repairing a broken section of fence together, a sudden gust of wind blew a large branch across their path. John instinctively moved to protect Ahioka, and she, in turn, instinctively followed his lead to steady him. They paused, breathing heavily, and looked at each other with a mix of surprise and shared understanding. It was a small moment, but it highlighted the unspoken trust and connection that had grown between them. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ahioka shared a small story from her past. She spoke of her family, the mountain she once called home, and the traditions she remembered. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but John listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He realized that every story she shared, no matter how brief, was a gift of trust. He honored it with quiet attention and gentle questions, strengthening the bond that was now undeniable. Life on the ranch continued in this rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. John and Ahioka were no longer simply a rescuer and the rescued. They had become partners in every sense of the word. Their connection was not yet spoken aloud as love, but it was present in every shared task, every glance, every moment of understanding. And in the quiet of the plains, as the sun rose and set, seasons changed, and the ranch flourished under their care. Both John and Ahioka began to feel that something extraordinary was growing between them. It was a bond built on trust, respect, shared struggles, and quiet moments of understanding, one that would eventually transform both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. As the months passed on John's ranch, the bond between him and Ahioka deepened in ways neither of them had fully understood. What had begun as simple care and survival had transformed into a quiet companionship, and now, subtle hints of affection began to surface. The trust between them had grown to the point where each could anticipate the other's needs, read unspoken cues, and share moments of laughter and understanding that went far beyond words. Ahioka had become an indispensable part of the ranch. She rose with John each morning, carrying out chores with efficiency and grace. She fed the animals, checked fences, repaired tools, and even began learning the routines of ranch management from John. Her presence lightened the workload, but more than that, she brought life to the ranch that John had not realized he was missing. Her laughter when a calf misbehaved, her careful hands guiding the horses, and her thoughtful attention to detail made the ranch feel alive in a new way. John, too, began to notice changes in himself. The once lonely rancher who had walked through the long, silent days now found himself looking forward to shared meals, small conversations, and quiet moments with Ahioka. He watched her as she worked, noticing the determination in her eyes, the careful precision of her hands, and the subtle strength in her movements. Each observation deepened his admiration for her, though he was careful not to let his feelings show too openly. He sensed that patience was needed, that their bond was growing naturally, and that any rush could disturb the delicate balance between them. One crisp autumn afternoon, a crisis arose that would test their partnership and strengthen their connection. A sudden outbreak of illness struck the herd. Several cattle were weak and unwell, and John knew that if they did not act quickly, the ranch could face serious losses. He moved with urgency, checking each animal, administering care as best he could, and trying to identify the cause. The task was overwhelming, but Ahioka did not hesitate. She moved beside him, helping to monitor the animals, clean stalls, and even gather herbs from the nearby hills that she remembered could help soothe minor ailments. John was impressed by her knowledge and her instinctive approach. She worked calmly and efficiently, her hands steady even under pressure. When he saw her kneeling beside a weak calf, whispering softly while administering care, he realized that her resilience was extraordinary. In that moment, he felt a surge of respect and gratitude. He could no longer see her as merely the young woman he had rescued. She was a partner, a companion, and someone whose courage and intelligence could not be measured by appearances alone. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to save the herd. Their efforts were rewarded when the cattle began to recover. Exhausted but relieved, John and Ahioka sat together on the porch one evening, sharing a quiet meal. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. "You were incredible today," John said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ahioka looked at him, her eyes softening. "We did it together," she replied. "The herd, it is important. We must care for it." John smiled, a warmth spreading through him that went beyond pride in their accomplishment. He realized that her words, simple as they were, carried a deeper truth. She had a sense of responsibility and loyalty that mirrored his own, and their shared values made their connection stronger than he had ever anticipated. As the days continued, John began to notice small signs of affection from Ahioka. She would linger a little longer when he spoke, offer subtle smiles, and sometimes touch his arm lightly when passing by. These gestures were tentative, almost shy, but they spoke volumes. John felt a quiet joy in these moments, a warmth that he had never experienced before. He realized that he was beginning to care for her deeply, not just as a companion or helper, but as someone who had become essential to his life and happiness. Ahioka, too, felt a growing fondness for John. She admired his patience, his dedication to the ranch, and the quiet kindness he showed to her and to the animals. She had known fear, hunger, and loss, but in John's presence she felt a sense of security and acceptance that was unfamiliar and comforting. Her feelings were cautious, unspoken, and tentative, but they were real. She began to look forward to their shared tasks, their conversations, and the small moments of connection that made the long days more bearable. One evening, as the first hints of winter approached, John and Ahioka were gathering firewood near the edge of the property. The sky was clear, and the stars were beginning to appear, twinkling faintly in the darkening sky. Ahioka paused, looking up at the stars with a faraway expression. John noticed her stillness and asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" Ahioka turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "The stars, they remind me of home," she said quietly. "My family, I have not seen them for a long time." John nodded, sensing the depth of her longing. "I wish I could understand what you've been through," he said gently, "but I am glad you are here now safe." Ahioka smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and wistfulness. "I am safe because of you," she replied. The words struck John deeply. He realized that their connection had grown far beyond simple companionship or shared work. It was a bond built on trust, care, and mutual reliance. He wanted to express his feelings, but he knew it was too soon. Instead, he simply reached out and gently placed a hand on hers, a gesture of comfort and support. Ahioka did not pull away. She accepted the touch, allowing the unspoken words to pass between them. In the weeks that followed, their partnership became even stronger. They anticipated each other's needs, worked seamlessly as a team, and shared moments of quiet joy and laughter. John began to notice the small details. How Ahioka's laughter could brighten even the most tiring day, how her presence made the ranch feel alive, and how her courage and intelligence inspired him to be better. Ahioka, too, found herself drawn to John's steady nature, his kindness, and the way he treated her with respect and care. One day, a traveler passed near the ranch and commented on the unusual pair. He mentioned how well they worked together and how the ranch seemed more alive than ever. John felt a quiet pride, but he also realized that the true value of Ahioka's presence was far more personal. It was not the opinions of others that mattered. It was the bond they shared, the trust, and the growing affection that neither could yet fully name. As winter approached, the nights grew colder and the ranch became quieter. John and Ahioka would sit by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories, planning for the future, and simply enjoying each other's company. The warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth growing in their hearts. They had faced challenges together, supported each other through difficult times, and discovered a connection that neither had expected. John began to realize that he could no longer imagine life without Ahioka. Her presence had become integral to his days, and her absence would leave a void he could not bear. Ahioka, too, felt a deepening attachment to John. She had learned to trust again, to hope again, and to feel that perhaps life could hold happiness after hardship. Their unspoken feelings were slowly transforming into a quiet love, one built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and the comfort of knowing that they had found someone who truly cared. The turning point came on a cold winter evening. The fire crackled in the hearth, and snow lightly dusted the land outside. John and Ahioka were preparing a meal together, working side by side in the warmth of the small kitchen. A minor accident, a spilled pot of stew, led to a burst of laughter from both of them. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in a shared moment of joy and connection. John looked at Ahioka, her eyes sparkling with amusement, and felt a surge of emotion he could no longer contain. He realized that this young woman, whom he had first rescued in the desert, had become the most important person in his life. She was no longer just a companion. She was someone he loved, someone whose presence made every day brighter and every challenge more bearable. Ahioka, sensing the depth of his gaze, felt her own emotions swell. She had been cautious, wary of expressing her feelings, but in that moment she knew that her heart was fully invested. She had found safety, trust, and affection in John, and she could no longer deny the bond that had grown between them. Though neither spoke the words aloud that night, the understanding was clear. Their lives were intertwined in a way that could not be undone. They had faced hardships together, built a life on trust and mutual support, and discovered a love that had grown quietly but powerfully. As they sat by the fire, the night stretching before them, John and Ahioka knew that the future held promise. The ranch would face challenges, seasons would change, and life would test them in new ways, but they would face it together. The foundation of trust, respect, and affection they had built would carry them forward, guiding them toward a life neither had imagined but both were ready to embrace. And so, in the quiet of the winter night, with the fire casting a warm glow around them, John and Ahioka's unspoken love began to solidify. It was a love born of shared struggle, mutual care, and the understanding that they had found in each other something rare and precious, a partnership that would shape the rest of their lives. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and the ranch slowly came alive with the gentle stirrings of new growth. The trees along the creek began to bud, wildflowers peeked through the earth, and the once dry fields showed hints of green. For John and Ahioka, these changes reflected more than the seasons. They mirrored the growth in their own hearts, the deepening bond between them, and the quiet realization that their lives had changed forever. Ahioka moved with a newfound confidence around the ranch. She managed the chores effortlessly, helped John with more challenging tasks, and even began taking initiative in planning for the upkeep of the land and animals. Her presence was no longer just helpful, it was vital. John, watching her work, often felt a surge of admiration and gratitude. She had transformed from the fragile, starving girl he had once found in the desert into a capable, intelligent, and resilient woman. Yet beyond admiration, there was a quiet affection that had grown between them. Neither had spoken the words aloud, but both felt it. John noticed the subtle glances Ahioka gave him, the way she lingered near him, the small gestures that spoke louder than words. Ahioka, in turn, noticed the way John seemed to brighten when she smiled, the tenderness in his voice when he gave instructions, and the quiet concern he showed for her well-being. Their hearts had begun to recognize what their minds had long known. They were meant to be more than companions. They were partners in every sense of the word. One bright morning, John and Ahioka were tending the fields, checking on the livestock, and preparing for the day's work. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the warmth of the sun made everything feel alive. Ahioka paused to look at a flowering bush, marveling at the delicate colors and soft petals. John walked over and stood beside her. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. Ahioka nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, life, it feels beautiful here," she replied softly. John smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "It's even more beautiful with you here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. The words hung in the air, delicate yet powerful. Ahioka's eyes widened slightly, and her lips curved into a small, shy smile. She felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of joy, relief, and love, knowing that John felt the same way she did. From that day, their relationship shifted subtly. They still worked side by side, tending the ranch and caring for the animals, but there was an unspoken understanding, a closeness that grew with each shared task. They began to share stories more openly, laugh together at small mishaps, and enjoy the simple pleasures of life on the plains. Each day, they discovered something new about each other, deepening the emotional bond that had been building quietly for months. One afternoon, a minor crisis brought them even closer. A sudden spring storm swept across the plains, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. The creek overflowed slightly, threatening to flood part of the field, and some of the livestock became frightened. John and Ahioka moved quickly to secure the animals and protect the land. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's moves, communicating without words, and supporting one another through the challenge. After the storm passed, they sat together on a fallen log, soaked and tired but filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. John turned to Ahioka and took her hand gently in his. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said sincerely. Ahioka squeezed his hand in return, her heart swelling. "We did it together," she replied softly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and affection. In that simple exchange, both realized that their feelings were no longer unspoken or uncertain. They had discovered something rare and precious, a love that had grown quietly from trust, respect, and shared hardship. Neither needed grand declarations. The depth of their connection was evident in their actions, their care for each other, and the ease with which they shared life together. As spring progressed, John made a quiet decision. He wanted to make their bond official, to honor the feelings they both held and the life they had built together. One evening, he prepared a small spot near the creek, where the water flowed gently over smooth rocks. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the land. He waited for Ahioka, his heart beating with anticipation and a quiet nervousness he had never felt before. When Ahioka arrived, carrying a small basket of wildflowers she had picked, she noticed the serene setup. The soft glow of the sunset, the gentle sound of the creek, and the peaceful surroundings seemed to echo the feelings they both held. John took a deep breath and turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth and sincerity. "Ahioka," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "From the day I found you, lost and in need, my life has changed in ways I never imagined. You've brought hope, joy, and strength into my life. I care for you more than I can say, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Ahioka's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of happiness and relief. She had long felt the same way but had waited for the right moment, for the certainty that their feelings were mutual. She nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes, John, I will," she whispered. The simplicity of the moment, the sincerity of their emotions, and the beauty of the natural world around them made the scene unforgettable. They embraced, knowing that they had found in each other a love that was rare, resilient, and enduring. In the weeks that followed, John and Ahioka began preparing for their life together. They continued to work on the ranch, tending the animals and land, but now with a sense of shared purpose and joy that went beyond the daily chores. Their love strengthened with each passing day, built on the foundation of trust, respect, and the shared experiences that had brought them together. The townspeople who had watched their relationship quietly began to notice the change. John and Ahioka were no longer just a rancher and a young woman he had rescued. They were a couple, partners in every sense, working together and supporting each other through every challenge. Their story became known as one of resilience, care, and the quiet power of love that grows through trust and understanding. As the years passed, John and Ahioka built a life filled with happiness, though not without challenges. They faced harsh weather, difficult seasons, and the demands of ranch life, but they faced everything together. Their love provided strength in moments of doubt, comfort in times of fear, and joy in the simple pleasures of everyday life. They laughed together, worked together, and supported each other through every hardship. They also began to build a family, welcoming children into their lives who would grow up knowing the values of resilience, care, and love that John and Ahioka embodied. The ranch became not just a place of work, but a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the energy of a family rooted in trust and affection. Looking back on their journey, both John and Ahioka often reflected on the day they met. The lonely rancher and the starving young woman had crossed paths by chance, yet their lives were forever changed. They had found in each other safety, companionship, love, and a shared purpose. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a lifelong partnership built on trust, respect, and enduring affection. Even as they grew older, the love between John and Ahioka never faded. They continued to care for the ranch, for their family, and for each other. The memories of the early days, the fear, the hardship, the cautious trust, remained, but they were now overshadowed by years of shared happiness and accomplishments. The story of the lonely rancher and the young Apache woman became not just a tale of rescue, but a testament to the power of love, patience, and trust to transform lives. And so, the lonely rancher who had once walked through life in quiet solitude found not only a companion but a life partner in Ahioka. The young woman who had once been lost and starving discovered safety, love, and a future she could never have imagined. Together, they built a life full of hope, happiness, and the enduring knowledge that sometimes the most extraordinary love begins in the most unexpected ways. Their story, rooted in trust and nurtured by care, became a legacy on the plains, a tale passed down through generations, inspiring others to believe in the quiet strength of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the power of finding home not just in a place, but in another person's heart.